I'm Jim Payne. I've been in the village. I bought this house I live in from Ms. Arnold. The Arnolds were the founders of the village of San Leanna, and I bought it from Ms. Arnold. Mr. Arnold had died several years before. I bought it from Ms. Arnold in 1984 and did extensive remodeling and moved into the house in 1985. So I've been in the village, been physically a resident of the village since about May 1985. 1989, we elected a new mayor, and I was chosen as mayor pro tem. And the mayor moved to Lockhart 6 months later, and that's how I became mayor. And I was mayor for 20 years. And the water system on the north side, the south side was very small then. We didn't have the San Leanna Loop subdivision. That came along later, and that's another thing that was done while I was mayor. But anyway, on the north side, we had old 2-inch water transmission lines, which meant that water pressure was woefully problematic. And people would, if you were washing the dishes, you couldn't take a shower. And people complained all the time. So we borrowed the money, and the village had never gone into debt before, but nobody seemed to be too concerned when I recommended that we borrow the money from the Texas Water Development Board and do a major upgrade of the water system. And we replaced all those 2-inch lines with 6-inch lines on the north side. All of that sits behind the community center, the big tank and the pump on the well there, all of that was part of the improvement. And we improved the pumps, and we upgraded the pumps, and so major. It was $640,000, and we finally paid it all off just this year. So I was very pleased to see, because my name was on that original loan. But anyway, we did a major upgrade of the water system after we had paved the roads. And then we did the subdivision development over there on Leanna Loops. That was a major deal. I mean, that whole area just didn't exist. It was forest. And we worked with the builders and saved as many trees as we could. I wrote a grant to the Texas Forest Service, and that's how we hired Dane. I wrote a grant to the Texas Forest Service to get a part-time arborist, and we hired Dane, and he worked with the contractors over there to save as many of the trees as we could, to locate the houses on the lot so that we didn't have to scrape off all the existing trees. And I was real proud of that, because if you drive around over there, there's big trees over there. And frequently when there's these new subdivisions, the first thing the developer does is scrape off all the trees. Well, we didn't. We saved the trees. So I was proud of that. And then we built the community center. We had some money. I went to the Capital Metro and asked for a special extra grant, sizable grant, to do flood prevention and paving on that street. The money we'd saved up to do it built the community center. Those were some of the improvements that were made in the village during the time I was mayor, and I had several good councils to work with. One of the major things we did, which served the village very, very well, is we hired Kathleen Lessing, and she contributed a great deal to the village. And Rebecca is now doing the job, but Kathleen did it for a long time. It's been interesting to be here for, what is it, from 1985 to to now. It's been interesting to be here. I hope San Leanna's got a good future. We're celebrating the past, and it deserves to be celebrated because a lot of good people worked hard to make this a nice, desirable place to live. But we're managing so far so good, and I hope we can continue to be a nice place to live for a long time.
Hello, I'm Molly Quirk. I've been in the village for almost 15 years, and I am the mayor, currently the mayor. I've been serving for 4 years. And I'm married to Reed Boyd, who is a longtime resident of the village. He has been here since 1980, so I get to hear all of the stories about the village and all the great things that happened back before we had paved roads, when they used to run around on four-wheelers and just make all sorts of havoc around the village. His parents both have served in the village capacity, different things. His father, Charles, was the mayor for quite some time. Well, I guess maybe 2 terms. And then Reed served on the zoning commission back when the south side was being developed, and he just got too busy, and so he had to relinquish his duties. Barb didn't serve on council, but she was the voice of the village. We didn't need a neighborhood watch because we had Barb, and she would walk around. She knew everybody. Some people didn't even know who I was, but knew who Barb was. So that's who I am, and that's where I'm how long I've been here in the village. As the mayor, I'm responsible for the finances of the village. I work with Rebecca and council to ensure that we are staying on budget and staying on task, and we aren't overspending. In my time as mayor, one of the things that I wanted to see come to fruition is our parks, and Charlie Burks has done an amazing job bringing that vision to life, especially during a pandemic, and we are very grateful that that has been completed. Next on our agenda is water. We've got some dated water systems, and we need to make sure that those things are in full operation. As you guys all know, we went through not only a pandemic, but then the ice storm Uri. I will forever be grateful to Mark Hartley, to Byron, and to my husband Reed for getting out there in the snow and the ice and the freezing cold rain to make sure that the village had water. So one of my fondest memories of the village is Caroline Dow. Caroline was our neighbor, had been Reed and Barb and Charles's neighbor for many years, but she was one of the neatest ladies I'd ever met. She would drive out of her she had beagles, and she had one of the most famous beagles of all time, Uno. Uno won the Westminster several years ago, and he was the first beagle to win, and Caroline was very proud of that. And Uno was a really neat dog, and she's just a really kind woman who really believed in the village and in making sure that the village stayed a village. She bought property up around the village to make sure that it wasn't developed. She owned the property across 1626, which is now in a trust, and so at least in our lifetimes, it shouldn't be developed, and it will be for wild birds and nature. But one of the things that's very cool about Caroline is that I left politics about a year ago, but I've always worked for Republicans, and we were able to have conversations about the current state of affairs, and we walked away with smiles on our faces, and were able to get along and really focus on the things that were important, and that was community and friendship and being positive.
Yeah, my family moved to Austin at the beginning of World War II. My parents' name, Joseph and Anna Seymour. We lived in many rent houses because of the war effort and everything. Property was hard to find. So after the war was over with, my daddy kept waiting for the price of houses to come down, and finally in '56, my mother said, "I'm going out and finding us a place to live." And so she found San Leanna and bought the house where they moved into. And my dad was one of the citizens that was instrumental in getting San Leanna incorporated as a Class B general law village, and that was in '70. It was wonderful to have Mother and Daddy living out here when our two sons were young, because it was such a nice place to come. And yeah, we used to go swimming down in Pretty Pool, which is hard to find nowadays, but it was on Slaughter Creek down there. And then also where the North Park is now, the Jim Payne Park, that was a big frog pond. And the boys always enjoyed coming out and throwing rocks and scaring the frogs. After we had been out here a little while, I decided that I wanted to get involved in the village government. I decided to run for mayor against the incumbent, and I was elected and served that 2-year term, and followed by 2 more 2-year terms. But the third 2-year term, I resign and be retired, both from UT and from the village of San Leanna. So that's my political history.
You actually knew Mr. Arnold.
Yes, yes. When Mother and Daddy first moved out here, of course, it was just a subdivision called the Estates of San Leanna. And Mr. Arnold, who developed it all, was still living in the house where Jim Payne lives today. And Mr. Arnold was quite a character. And he used to come riding down San Leanna Drive alongside our property, and on a horse, and all full regalia, jock spurs and a white scarf and a riding crop and a Great Dane running alongside him. Prince Khalif was his name. And for some reason that just aggravated the living daylights out of my daddy. He said, look at there, he still thinks he's Lord of the Manor and owns every bit of this property. But it didn't take much for my dad to get irritated anyway. So he was, we had a village-wide meeting. At that point, Mr. Arnold's well was furnishing water to the homes out here, and had a very reasonable rate. But he called a meeting of the residents, and in his very flamboyant way said, I can sell this water district for millions, millions. And so the residents decided to get together, and they bought it from him for a lot less, believe me. And then the San Leanna Water Company was created with everybody paying, I think, about $500 to become a member of. Being a Class B general law village does a lot of good for the residents, because by law our taxes are capped at 25 cents per hundred, which is considerably lower. That's the property tax, capped at 25 cents per hundred. So that makes a lot of difference on somebody's tax bill. And this is, we have got to keep our government intact, or the Secretary of State can revoke our incorporation, and then we know who will come and get us, and that'll be the city of Austin, and things will change dramatically. And there was a small movement, I don't know what, 25 years ago, to petition to get our address changed from Austin on this side and Manchac on the south side, get it changed to San Leanna, Texas. And the citizens took a vote on it and turned that down. Me being one of them, I liked the association with Austin. That way when you went somewhere and somebody said, "Where are you from?" and you're going to say San Leanna, they're not going to know what you're talking about. But if you say Austin, they've got you pinpointed.
Hello, my name is John Linton. I'd like to spend a couple of moments here to run over a little brief history of myself, my family here at the village of San Leanna. I came to the village of San Leanna in 1990. Only my wife, she and I, we don't have kids. Pretty soon after I got here, probably about 6 months after I got here, I got asked to serve as the water commissioner since the board had lost one for a while. And I did, and it turned out to be a 13-year activity. So during that 13 years, I served as a water commissioner, as a village board member for about 10 years, and then about 3 years I served as the mayor. During my time as the water commissioner, we were fortunate to get a lot of development done here in the village. What is not usually known is that the village was kind of piecemeal together once it got started, with the families hooking onto the water system however it seemed they were able to do it. Other items that were pretty important during my time, the lower half of the, well, it's not quite lower half, but lower 1/4 of the village was annexed, which is just below where we're standing here at the community center. Because of this annexation, we acquired some additional land, and we also were pretty concerned about a place to hold meetings, handle and take care of administrative activities. Wanted to have a community center where I'm standing right now, and we wanted an office. And so anyway, I would like to close in saying is that we have almost had a volunteer board and mayor activity here in our particular area. What I mean is that all of the positions and authority have been villagers in the time that I've been here, and the service that all of those individuals have provided have been in an effort to make this village a wonderful home place for many people to raise their kids, to retire, enjoy a safe area, quiet area, and something that's affordable, or under those kind of conditions. So it's been my pleasure to have lived in the village now for more than 20 years, and my neighbors have been just wonderful folks, and I'm happy to call myself a San Leannian.
I'm Rebecca Howe. I'm the city administrator for the village of San Leanna, and I've been with the village since 2017. I moved into the village in 2015. So as the city administrator, I deal with a lot of the daily administrative tasks for the village, as well as all of the legal posting requirements that we have for Texas and federal guidelines for meetings and that sort of thing. I also work for the water utility, doing all billing, any sort of customer satisfaction issues that might arise. That all comes to me. In my role as the city administrator, I've had the pleasure of working with a lot of the former city administrators, former mayors, council members, and getting to know a lot of the residents who live in San Leanna. I think that one of the really special things about San Leanna and working for the city of San Leanna, or village of San Leanna, I should say, is that I get to know almost all of the residents who live in the city. You can't really say that when you work for a bigger city. It's a very special type of community that we have here, where we're very tight-knit, and it's easy to know your neighbor. I also work along with Linda Barrett on zoning issues, taking care of any legal issues that arise, and making sure that our constituents are informed through newsletters and emails and that sort of thing. In the last few years, we've had some major strides made in digital communications with our upgrades to our website and that sort of thing, to just really bring us kind of into the 21st century as a small city, which is sometimes hard with budget constraints and that sort of thing. Since we moved here in 2015, we have had 2 children. Our first just started at the public school down the street at Menchaca in 1st grade, and we have a 2-year-old as well. They've really enjoyed the growing families in San Leanna. Their little San Leanna social group has really grown, and we're able to play with lots of different people, and it's just such a blessing, I feel, to have such a small and close community that they can grow up in. It's really a special place. Since I've lived in the village for about 6 years, I've missed out on a lot of the larger major changes in the village of San Leanna, like paving roads and that sort of thing. But in the last few years, we have had a remarkable amount of change and growth, both in the village and around the village. New houses coming in, developments around the village, and new residents moving in. And I think that one thing that's really important to touch on amongst all that change is what hasn't changed, which is our sense of community in the village of San Leanna. And it goes without saying that people like the mayors and the council and volunteers put a lot of work into making our village great, but it's also the residents. You know, every time that anyone shows up for a volunteer position or shows up to attend an event or takes their dog for a walk, they're just really putting in that work to keep our community, our sense of community strong. And I think that everybody should be really proud of that, and I'm very proud of that. Proud to say that I live in a community that sustains itself that way.
What's your name?
Sarah Nelson.
How long have you been in San Leanna?
I guess 60 some odd years now. Mm-hmm. When we moved out here, our next door neighbors were the Gatlins, and that was kind of nice because my mother and Mrs. Gatlin had known each other back in the 30s when they both moved to Austin out of high school. So it was really neat to watch her reconnect with an old friend, you know. And they had a son that was my age, so that was good. There were 2 houses on down where the Walkers live. Hacienda. Sombreros that way, yeah. In the Gatlin's front yard. It was the best front yard, and the trees were just right, and the whole neighborhood would come, and friends that we had met up at Menchaca Elementary would come, and we'd all play baseball. And we had more than enough for 2 teams, you know, when we got everybody together. There were a lot of young kids out here then, and it wasn't, you know, it was just a mile walk from the people that lived in Menchaca, so the kids would come and we'd all get together and play baseball. What do I remember about the Arnolds? They had a daughter that was my age and an older son. That was the Leanna part, Lee and Ann. Yeah, my understanding was, and I don't know that this is true either, was that this was a working ranch, and it was called the Wagner Ranch. Now, there's 2 Wagners, I think. I don't know how you spell her last name. There was a Wagner Ranch over off the old San Antonio Highway that has now mostly been subdivided and is homes and apartments and this, that, and the other. And it straddled the creek down there, you know, so you see when you drive down there all the places it used to be. But I don't know if that Wagner was any relation to this one or not.
Name Caroline Bell.
She told me one time, she said, "Sarah, I can't help it. If it's next to me, I have to have it." She was our mayor for a long time, and she was wonderful, you know. She really was.
I got a picture of her.
She's a wonderful person, yeah.
Good morning, I'm Mike Hammock, and I live at 11517 Hunting Creek Lane since 1973. Daddy made a deal with the guy that owned the house. He built 7 of those ranch houses out here. I can't tell you which of the 7 houses. I know the one that just sold up here, my daughter was living in. It was one of them. We're sitting on an area that I was not allowed to come play. This was where everybody brought rock and fill and things that they didn't have a place to dump them, and they dumped them. And this was like snake heaven. When we moved to Hunting Creek Lane, we were the only people that lived on Hunting Creek Lane. When spring hits, it muffles down pretty nice. You feel like you're still out in the country, but you're really not. I mean, we're really not in the country anymore.
No.
But it's a little piece of country in the midst of all the chaos, you know.
Right.
Hello, my name is Chip Kidd, and we moved to San Leanna about 40 years ago in 1981. I was a write-in candidate for mayor in about 1984, and I served 1 term as mayor. I also served on the Board of Aldermen and on the zoning committee. The biggest issue during my term was initiating and passing a property tax on San Leanna residents, and we all know how popular taxes are. It's hard to believe now, but from the incorporation until the mid to late 1980s, the roads in San Leanna were gravel and were frequently dusty and filled with potholes. So one of the first projects undertaken with the new property taxes was paving San Leanna streets. And it made us all feel like we were suddenly living in the 20th century. My wife, Vivian Caldwell, served as village secretary from 1983 to 1988, and she helped initiate and modernize the water billing system. Let's see, we lived at the end of a dead-end street, Bluebonnet Lane, on the south side of 1626, and there was no through traffic, so it was an ideal spot for raising children and having pets with no fear of speeding cars. But having gravel roads and no sidewalks was not very accommodating for the kids' wagons and bicycles. And being primarily an older population, they really didn't have many neighborhood friends in San Leanna. It's all worked out. The kids are long up and out of the house, and Vivian and I will likely be here for another 40 years. So we love it, loved it for a long time, and couldn't really think of living anywhere else.